China's might, its power, it's controlled by an authoritarian government that's dedicated to really all the bad things that are contrary to democracy, make it a world challenge on a level we haven't seen. I'm not even sure the Soviet Union during the Cold War was a level of challenge that China is to freedom, to religious liberty, and to other things. So I think for that reason Americans should care, but I think also because of their determination to change us, people should care.
Hey, welcome back everyone. We're sitting here with Bill Saunders in Washington. He's the director of many different human rights projects at the Catholic University. We're talking about what's happening in China and the issues we're facing with religious suppression there and how this may spread to other parts of the world. Bill, it's a real pleasure having you on Crossroads.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Now, when people hear about religious suppression in China, normally we hear about bits and pieces of it: slave labor in Xinjiang, persecution of Falun Gong, persecution of house Christians. But the full extent of it and the context of it is rarely discussed. So what is the situation of religious freedom in China?
I would say it doesn't exist. The Chinese Communist Party, of course we always distinguish the Chinese Communist Party from the Chinese people or from China, but the Chinese Communist Party doesn't believe in religious freedom. They believe everything, the Communist Party is essentially God or the final word on everything. So, as you mentioned, the I'm not sure you mentioned Tibetans, but they're persecuted and harassed, and Dalai Lama's been driven out, and there's all kinds of things there. The Uyghurs are being persecuted, and have been in re-education camps or concentration camps, and we've lost track, of many of them. The Falun Gong is mercilessly persecuted, although they keep fighting back because they have a lot of people internationally. The Christian churches are being essentially demolished, whether they're the underground church or what was called the underground church or the official church, and literally churches are being abolished at Christmas time, which we're at right now. They have to sing hymns to President Xi along with Christian hymns. President Xi, his sayings are taught from the pulpit along with the text of the Bible, and they are engaged in a retranslation of the Bible. So religious freedom does not exist under the CCP.
Well, you touched on a very important issue, which is there are the persecuted versions of the religions, the real versions of the religions. Then the Chinese Communist Party has altered versions of the religions, including, for example, the Cultural Revolution. When they persecuted religions, one of the things they did was establish these new institutions that worked as state-run versions, like the China Buddha Association and so on. They did this with every major religion, and in the process of that changed the religions. What have we seen in terms of them changing these religions?
Well, I think, again, just taking the Christian as an example, I mean, if they retranslate the Bible, and if they require singing of hymns to the president of the country, and if they teach the sayings of the president of the country, you can just see they're completely transforming what it means to be a Christian. Under President Xi, there's been a consolidation of power under him and a cult of personality, which rivals what was done under Mao. So, they're determined to do that. They've driven out the Dalai Lama. They found a Panchen Lama that was not the Panchen Lama that was the legitimate one found by the Tibetan Buddhists. So yeah, they're going to control them all completely. I think the fundamental fact to understand is, like, if you look at what's happening with the Uyghurs, they have millions of cameras. They try to keep them all on camera so they know what's going on. They have this facial recognition and social rating system. So it's not just like if you or I was on camera and somebody put a camera on us and they said, oh, there's Bill or whatever. They can even read, I don't understand all the sophisticated ways they do it, but they can read your emotions and your thoughts and kind of, am I coming to meet a friend for lunch? They can they can read various things, or am I coming to do an interview on TV, or am I coming to go before a judge? So their aim is to control the entire society. And just about the only source of challenge to them is religion. Somebody who has a God that's higher than President Xi, or an allegiance that competes for Communist Party allegiance.
Well, in one of the, and yeah, with the facial recognition software they have in China, it's true that they look at people's facial expressions and eye movements, and they try to interpret what the person is thinking. It's very bizarre technology.
But I saw a documentary on it, and it sounds just impossible, but at least this documentary, it sounded quite plausible, because they have these master computers, these gigantic computers that can process so much information so quickly. So.
Yeah. Now, you touched on something important, which is in China. It used to be the situation that communist regimes, socialist regimes, that socialism is the form they take in government, communism being the guiding ideology or belief. It used to be that they didn't want people believing in a power higher than government, and so they see religion as a threat to their power. Not only that, but religions also represent traditional culture, which they're trying to destroy more often than not. And so you almost always see religions get persecuted under socialist and communist regimes. We've seen now a shift in China where they not only want to suppress religion, where people can't believe in a higher power, but now they're putting government itself and party leaders in the seats of God, where they are not only demolishing temples, but they're converting temples into places for party worship, where Mao Zedong and his wife have been deified. And you mentioned too, even the teachings of Xi Jinping are read like religious scripture at temples.
Yeah, yeah.
Where do you see this going?
I don't know. It's an incredible. I don't think in the history of the world there's ever been a government that has tried to do what this government is trying to do in China, which is to control everything and everybody and rate them all. And you can't get on the subway if you don't have the right. You can't get a bus token if you don't have the right social score, and observe everybody all the time. And it really is what we used to think was science fiction, but it's not. I mean, their aim is to do it, and they've made progress doing it. So I think it has to end in the defeat of the Communist Party and the replacement of the Communist Party by some form of democracy.
Now, when we hear about religious persecution in China, I think a lot of people could get behind, standing up for human rights and fighting against religious persecution. But the idea, for most people, it still feels very far away. Do you think the persecutions in China could spread?
Well, I think the Chinese Communist Party is always going to try to crush any opposition it faces. So, if territorially they expand, they will crush whatever kind of religious institutions are there. I think it expands in a kind of more subtle way here in the United States, because they try to undermine our institutions. And I have no doubt they're doing that in the churches as well. There's all kinds of, again, this sounds crazy, except go read the newspapers, Google this stuff, you'll find this. The story just came out, I think, yesterday from the UK about Chinese communist agents who have been placed in different institutions all over. In this case, I think it was Britain, but it was the same thing here. So, and a colleague I work with, Chen Guangchen, has told me about the fact there's been a number of immigrants in from China who've come in on false documents, but are really agents of the CCP in order to get jobs at various places and to be available. They might be a deep kind of agent or whatever, but they're available. And we know about the suborning of the research at institutions where the CCP is paying American researchers to sell things to them. We know about the Confucius Institutes on campuses, which are really fronts for the CCP, not cultural exchange, neutral kind of things, but really pushing CCP ideology. And I think that's nonstop. There was a speech about, I think in November, by Professor D
Di Dongshen, correct?
Yes, and I don't know if you've reported on that, but that's very interesting because he kind of gives away the store on what the Communist Party is up to. They bribe, he just talks about flat out bribery of people to do things. And you bribe people in different ways. You might set them up as kings in China, you know, or you might pay them money or whatever else. And he talks about how they've tried to use Wall Street to influence the current Trump administration, but that hasn't been so successful. So freedom is at risk from the Communist Party, Chinese Communist Party, not only in China, where they've just about suppressed it, and we haven't talked about Hong Kong, we see what's happened to Hong Kong, but wherever it operates, and they see us as their big enemy, they want to replace us as the world's superpower, and you know, America's at risk, its domestic institutions are at risk, its economic system, its educational system, you know, so the threats are not just kind of outside militarily or domestic, strategic, like in the South China Sea, they're also internal.
Now, in terms of the current global climate, when it comes to religious liberty, and when it comes to what the world is facing, including right here in the United States, where, for example, the ability for people to gather to worship is being restricted. This has been framed by some prominent Catholics as a battle of light and darkness. Would you agree with this assessment?
I think that religious liberty and religious freedom, and particularly from the Catholic perspective, but I think from Christian perspective, maybe from all religious perspective, is the first liberty. I mean, John Paul II, the Pope, said it's the first freedom. Why did he say that? Because it's the essential foundation on which you can build other human rights. I mean, in my human rights program, we teach religious freedom as the first freedom, a foundation stone along with the right to life and marriage and a family. And that's the kind of Catholic social thought. So I think anything that goes after religious freedom is contrary to the good of individuals and to the common good, because we believe the common good, you can't build a true common good unless there's religious freedom and things like that. So I think anywhere where religious freedom is seen as the enemy or is not appreciated, if it's burdened unfairly, that's a big problem. I think that, frankly, the power and determination of the CCP alone would make it kind of a global light and darkness or winter time for religious freedom, because they pose such a threat. I think, any countries that face any issues like we have with the pandemic here in the United States, we've got to realize that religious freedom is far from the enemy, it's the friend. I mean, it's in the first part of the First Amendment of the Constitution. It's not, paragraph 10, footnote 44. It's first part of the First Amendment. So religious freedom has to be respected if you want to have a properly functioning democracy.
And just as a last question, I've been asked myself, because I've reported a lot on human rights in China, why care about China? Why China? So for you too, why focus on what's happening in China when it comes to these abuses?
Well, I would say first, of course, we should care about human rights abuses anywhere. But it's also true you can't do everything everywhere. And China's might, its power, its control by an authoritarian government that's dedicated to really all the bad things that are contrary to democracy, make it a world challenge on a level we haven't seen. I'm not even sure the Soviet Union during the Cold War was a level of challenge that China is to freedom, to religious liberty, and to other things. So I think for that reason Americans should care, but I think also because of their determination to change us, people should care. And they should see then the linkage, and some of these heroic dissidents like Chen Guangchen and others who stand up and call the Chinese Communist Party what it is, we need to listen to them because it is a threat. We saw the crushing of democracy in Hong Kong. And if that doesn't prove to you that you can't be friends with the CCP, I don't know what does.
Is there anything else you'd like to say, or any points you feel we missed you want to touch on?
No, not really. I think just there is no bigger threat to the United States. And I think it's military threat, strategic threat. You know, it's alliances, or what are our alliances like? I mean, we started alliances with Japan and Australia and others, but China's, or the CCP is starting alliances. So it's a global struggle in those terms, military, economically, politically. We see what the pandemic did to the global economy, but it's also a threat to us internally. And even if the U.S. had a kind of wall that couldn't be breached to protect us from those things, they're still determined to subvert our institutions. So that, to me, is why we must pay attention to the CCP.
Yeah.
And we must defeat the CCP.
Now, where can people learn more about your work?
Well, I have, as you mentioned, several programs at the Catholic University of America. One, I have a Master of Arts program, which is at mahumanrights.com. Also a Center for Religious Liberty at the law school, and a program in human rights, a Center for Human Rights as well, as part of the Institute for Human Ecology, so they could go to ihe.edu and find information there.
Great. Hey, Bill Saunders, real pleasure having you on Crossroads.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.